We've all heard the phrase, a 100-year flood, but what does that actually mean? Well, one of the first things to acknowledge is that it's a little complicated, but we will do our best to explain it. To start off with, there's a common misunderstanding that if a 100-year flood has occurred, then it'll be another 100 years before we see a flood that big again. This is a misunderstanding that has arisen over time due to slightly misleading terminology. If you were to ask a hydrologist or engineer what a 100-year flood was, they would say that it has a 1% annual exceedance probability, or AEP. In simpler terms, there is a 1% or 1 in 100 chance that a river will see a flood of that size or larger per year. To further understand this, consider rolling a dice. With every roll, we have a 1 in 6 chance of rolling a 6. We also know that we have the same chance of rolling a 6 every time we roll the dice. So just because our last roll was a 6, it doesn't mean we won't roll another 6, or that after 10 rolls, we won't have rolled 1 at all. The same is true with floods. Unfortunately, if there was a 100-year flood this week, it doesn't mean that another one won't happen for another 99 years. In fact, it could happen again this year or next. Another issue that often causes some confusion is why the return period of a flood changes over time. You may have heard of a flood being called a 100-year event when it happens, but later it's referred to as a smaller event, such as a 50 or 80-year flood. This is because our understanding of the size of an extreme flood is based upon a statistical analysis of those that we have previously seen on that particular river. Every time there is a flood, we gather more data that gives us a better understanding of how big floods in a certain river might be. We use that data to determine what size the current flood is, and if it's bigger than anything recorded on that river before, it may influence the current estimation of flood event levels. For example, what was previously considered a 100-year event may be downgraded to an 80-year event. This is particularly noticeable in many New Zealand rivers where we don't have a long history of recorded floods. It is also worth considering the fact that our estimation of how big a 100-year flood might be is based upon floods that we have seen before. This means that it is likely to change in the future, especially when factors like climate change or changing land uses are considered. So, a 1 in 100-year flood means there is a 1% chance of a flood of a certain size happening in a river in any given year. That 100-year size is determined by historical floods on the river and may change, especially with factors such as climate change and weather patterns added to the mix. Fortunately, these are relatively rare events, but when they do happen, it is helpful to understand what the terminology means.